Hello, today I'm going to read pages 210 through 217 of The Hope Chest. Today we get to see the Model T Ford in action. Remember that the Hope Chest is a car that Chloe bought from inheritance money when instead of buying stuff for when she was married, like tablecloths and plates and stuff, she went and bought a car, and that's why she ended up getting kicked out of the house. So these are Model T Fords that are rolling out of this assembly line here. There's these ones up here are more what it's like. Hers was a smaller cab and then it had a truck bed on the back. It's not like the full cab one like that last one that you see. So in this, Violet actually gets to start driving the Model T Ford today, which is going to be really cool. She's going to try and find, there's two senators, Blotz and Credwell, that are trying to leave. Remember that rather than some of the senators wanting to take side and vote for suffrage or vote against suffrage, they just would rather leave town and not have to vote at all. And these were two that the suffragists thought were on their side. So they're going to go try and catch them before they leave town. So it's funny, it makes it seem like Violet's driving super, super fast, but, Violet only just barely learned how to drive the Hope Chest like a few hours before this. Remember, it's still Sunday. And so she's probably like going like 5 miles an hour or 10 miles an hour. She's not going very fast, but still, she's in the car driving. But the Model T Fords did actually able to get up to like 40 miles an hour, which is pretty impressive. All right, let's cut the chit-chat, Mr. D, and start reading. So yesterday we learned that the Palmer agents have finally caught up to Mr. Martin. So let's see what happens. Resisting arrest, the agent commented, twisting Mr. Martin's arms more tightly behind his back. It wasn't a knife fight, said Mr. Martin through clenched teeth. The other man had a knife. I did not. And I am a U.S. citizen. Right. You became a citizen in 1913, said the agent. In other words, after you'd already become a radical. A radical can't become a U.S. citizen. I think the courts will find that your citizenship oath is null and void. That's insane, Mr. Martin protested. Drops of sweat stood out on his forehead. Having his arms twisted must have hurt a lot, but he was trying not to show it. That was being brave, Myrtle supposed, but she wished he would cry out in pain so that his captors would be satisfied and stop hurting him. In your position, I wouldn't go calling the laws of the United States of America insane, the agent suggested. I don't believe that is the law, Mr. Martin panted, and if it is the law, then it is insane. Did you hear that, Hank? The agent asked. Sure did, Christopher, said Hank. Anything else you want to tell us about the laws of the United States, Arpadfi? Mr. Martin glared at both of them, and would have liked to have said a lot of things, Myrtle could tell. Only that I'm as much of the U.S. citizen of the USA as you are, and I know my rights. You're a member of a radical organization, and you don't have no rights, said Hank smugly. I'm a member of a labor union, said Mr. Martin. It's my... He gasped in pain, and Myrtle winced again. First Amendment right. The International Workers of the World is a labor union, the way the Boston Tea Party was a tea party, Christopher said. Quit arguing with us, or he might notice that you pulled a knife on us. You see how he had that knife out when we came in, Hank? He picked up the open pocket knife where it had fallen on the floor. Myrtle would have liked to have grabbed it and put it away, but then they'd probably say she'd pulled it on them. Sure did, said Hank. You gonna come along with us quietly, Arpadfi, or should we report you pulled a knife on us? Mr. Martin looked deflated the same way he had on the train when he'd argued with the conductor. Myrtle thought, what choice do I have? I am coming along quietly. He looked at Myrtle as if he was about to say something. Myrtle shook her head and put a finger to her lips to silence him. It was better for both of them if Myrtle remained invisible. In spite of the fact that Mr. Martin was coming along quietly, the agent seemed to find it necessary to do quite a bit of kicking and shoving to get him out the door. Myrtle turned away. She picked up the knife Mr. Martin, or Padfi, or whatever his name had dropped, folded it, and stuck it in the pocket of her blue dress next to her picture of Mama and Daddy. She went to the cot where she slept and grabbed her toothbrush. She was just heading out the door when she bumped into Mrs. Reddy coming in. Got him, did they? Said Mrs. Reddy. Thank goodness. Child, now that you're free of that horrible man, I'm taking you to Mrs. Frankie Pierce. She's a colored suffragist leader who's done wonders in finding institutions that will take in wayward colored girls, and I'm sure she'll find... Mrs. Reddy was packing up Myrtle's bundle as she said all this, and Myrtle didn't wait around to hear the rest of it. She didn't know if Mrs. Reddy had turned in Mr. Martin. Lots of people could have done it. He'd been so careless about staying hidden, and she wasn't about to ask her. If Mrs. Reddy had done it, then she'd have to hate Mrs. Reddy, and she really didn't have time for that. She ran out the door. Chapter 17. The Hope Chest. Why would they run away? Violet asked as she and Chloe dashed back down the stone steps of the Capitol Hill. If they're against the amendment, why just not vote no? Because they promised us their votes, Chloe explained breathlessly. It is much too hot for all this running, and it's easier to run away than go back on a promise. Fortunately, the hope chest started after a few turns of its crank. So there was a crank. Rather than turning a key like we do now, you actually went to the front of the car and you had a big lever that you'd stick into the front and you'd twist it around to start the engine. Violet came climbing into the passenger seat when Myrtle came running up, out of breath and holding a toothbrush in her hand. Violet! Miss Chloe! Mr. Martin! Calm down, dear, Chloe suggested. Myrtle shook her head. They've arrested Mr. Martin. Chloe went pale. Who? Agents, said Myrtle. They hit him and told him he wasn't an American. Violet, turn the car off and wait here, Chloe said. She followed Myrtle, and both of them went charging off down Union Street. Violet watched them go. Should she follow them? No. She was worried about Mr. Martin, but whatever there was to be done for him, Chloe and Myrtle were going to do. Chloe had told Violet to wait here, but someone had to search the highway for Blotz and Credwell. The Suffs were counting on Chloe and Violet to do it. Could she do it? She'd only driven the hope chest once before, with Chloe sitting next to her to tell her what to do. Well, never mind, she could do it. She had to. It was a good thing the hope chest was still running, because Violet doubted she could have started the thing by herself. She moved over into the driver's seat. She sat as tall as she could so she could see over the hood, and she stretched her legs to reach the pedals. She breathed in the smell of burning gasoline. She looked down at the pedals on the floor. R for reverse. She kicked the pedal. The hope chest gave an anguished cough as though it was about to stall, and Violet grabbed the throttle and gave it some gas. The car shot backward. A horse whinnied in fear. Violet stamped on the pedal marked B for brake and grabbed at the steering wheel. Terrified, she turned and looked behind her. The horse was making good its escape, its rider clinging to its back, but she'd come within an inch of hitting a parked Hupmobile. Violet gripped the steering wheel so hard that if it would have been alive, it would have screamed. Resolutely, she stamped on the clutch to move the car forward, and then carefully touched the throttle and gave it some gas. The hope chest lunged like a racehorse breaking from a starting gate. Several pedestrians scattered out of Violet's way. She didn't remember the car going this fast when she drove it with Chloe, but the paved street offered less resistance than the grassy field. The car surged down the street. Violet clasped the steering wheel tightly and concentrated on staying in the exact middle of the street. She knew you're supposed to drive on the right, but that looked too difficult. There were so many things a person could hit on the side of the road. Cars and lampposts and people. She thudded over the trolley tracks. The thing was going much too fast, and she wasn't even touching the throttle. She half stood, trying to see the road better. She seemed to be hurtling at things and people on both sides, and each time she cranked the steering wheel to avoid something else sprang up in her path. She couldn't imagine why anyone would want to drive a car. This was horrible, like a nightmare. She was supposed to turn left up here, she knew, to get to the highway. But how did you slow down to turn? She cranked the steering wheel to the left, and the hope chest veered wildly, rocking onto two wheels and then hitting the pavement again hard. "Reduce the spark!" a woman screamed at her from the sidewalk. Out of the corner of her eye, Violet noticed that a lot of people were staring at her. Violet looked down to find the lever on the steering wheel that controlled the spark, and the hope chest climbed up onto the sidewalk. People fled, screaming. "I'm sorry," Violet yelled as she got the car back into the road and got the spark down. Now the hope chest was much quieter and didn't seem to want to go as fast. It coasted slowly to a stop, coughed, belched out a cloud of burned-smelling black smoke, and almost stalled before Violet grabbed the throttle lever and it jumped forward again. This time, she kept her eyes on the road and kept driving right down the middle. "I don't care what anyone says," she heard a woman on the sidewalk say. "There ought to be a law against children driving those things." Oh, that's fun. We'll stop there. So, if you noticed, Chloe is running off with Myrtle to go figure out what to do about Mr. Martin. And so Violet takes it upon herself to drive the hope chest to try and find the senators that are trying to escape town. And she's veering wildly across the street, taking the car up on two wheels, and driving on sidewalks. Pedestrians fleeing everywhere. It's a pretty fun part in the book. So, thanks for listening.